if you'd just tell me, why is Brazil's private equity climbing even as the country lags behind the rest of the BRICS?
Yeah, thanks, Trish, for the invitation, and glad to be with you today. You know, private equity investors do not make their money on GDP growth. I'm not saying that, a fast-growing economy isn't a benefit, but there are a lot of positive trends in Brazil that have made it attractive to global private equity investors. Obviously, it's an economy that is 200 million people, so significant population base. And while natural resources might be traditionally where investors would be thinking of investing, it's actually been consumer trends and expanding demand from an increasing middle class for products and services such as education, healthcare, retailing that's been driving much of the investment.
So talk to me about that consumer base. What is so special about the consumer base in Brazil?
Well, it's interesting you should ask it that way. Brazilian consumers have actually been tracked alongside Americans as being very similar in terms of the types of products and consumption trends. Internet consumption and usage is very high as well, and we've seen a real increase in e-commerce investment over the course of last year. But particularly, there are areas such as retailing, fast food restaurants, healthcare, and education, where we've been seeing the majority of the deals in Brazil over the course of the last few years.
You know, Brazil has undergone quite a transformation just in the course of the last decade, Cate, in that you suddenly have this emerging middle class that wasn't necessarily there 10 years ago. Walk me through the reasons why suddenly you have more people with disposable income to spend on all these consumer products in Brazil.
Well, of course, there's been global trends such as significant demand from other emerging economies such as China for Brazil's natural resources. So there's been a huge boom there. There's been new findings of oil and gas in the country that have been driving at a very macro level. But more importantly, or at least equally importantly, you've had a very stable economy over the course of the last decade. So Brazil, along with many other major economies in Latin America, has emerged from a period of hyperinflation or market volatility to much more competent political and economic management. And so, for example, where we saw the dramatic downturn of the financial and credit crisis in the U.S. in 2007, 2008, that was a blip on the charts for Brazil. And they came out of that really unscathed with very well-capitalized banks, well-capitalized companies, and consumers ready to spend and consume.
You know, it seems also as though there are some Brazilian companies that are very active here in the U.S. I mean, think about 3G, private equity company that was involved with the Burger King. Think about the HEINZ deal, and even think about AB InBev, which has some of its roots in Brazil. So you've got some of these big Brazilian companies acquiring iconic American brands. What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, if I look at it within the context, for example, of private equity investors, and of course, Jorge Paulo Lemann of 3G had a track record in that industry in Brazil before becoming active in the United States. These are people who've had to manage through hyperinflation, very challenging markets in the past, and are actually very successful and sophisticated asset managers. Also, something that's not typically widely known and that LAFCA tracks very closely in some of our regulatory benchmarks is that Brazil has actually an excellent regulatory environment for private equity and venture capital. So the laws in Brazil go back to the year 1994 when the first funds laws were passed. They have a fund structure in Brazil that is tax-free for both local and international investors. It's really been a huge boom to the industry. And the pension funds in Brazil have been investing in private equity for over a decade.